Would you eat lab-grown meat? This is the University of the Netherlands.
Well, I would, of course. What are we going to eat 20 years from now? Feeding the world is really a complex problem, and it's getting more and more complex. Well, what are we going to eat? Are we going to eat nothing, just take pills like in some science fiction stories? Are we going to drink protein and whey protein-rich beverages like some nerds in California have cooked up so that you don't have to interrupt work to get some nutrition into your body? Or are we going to have business as usual? Like all the varieties of the food and even more, because for the last 30 years we have been kind of used to an ever-increasing choice in our foods. So of course I'm not psychic, so I don't know what we're going to eat really. What I do know is that business as usual, especially in terms of how we produce that food, is not going to happen. It just cannot be. What is the problem? Mostly meat. Meat is a really, really resource-intense part of our diet. So intense that we already use 70% of all our arable land for meat production, for livestock agriculture. And according to the FAO, in 2050, so that's 30 years from now, we will need 70% more meat. Well, everybody can do that math. Ain't gonna happen, right? We just don't have enough planet to make that happen. So the other problem is that there is greenhouse gas emission associated with meat production. And especially a cow is an emitter of methane. 39% of all the methane in this world is belched by cows, and about 5% of the CO2. Totally, livestock agriculture, about 20% of all our greenhouse gas emission. So if we want to reach those Paris agreements, we have to do something about that livestock agriculture. There's just no other way. And of course, there's animal welfare issues also. So lots of different problems associated with that meat, but we love it, right? Who of you is vegetarian? Okay, quite a bit. I kind of expected that. Still a small minority. Who is vegan? Nobody? Okay. Notice that I didn't raise my hand either. I'm really a flawed person. I love meat, and in spite of all the problems that I see with it, I still eat it. And apparently it's very difficult for us to really change our behavior, right? So we can all become vegetarians. There are 2 billion vegetarians on this planet, and they all live, and they are happy, and they procreate, and they perform labor and all that stuff. But it's difficult to change. So what are the other alternatives? Well, we can make meat in a petri dish. This is a photograph of a frozen piece of meat that we made in the lab, and I will show a couple of other examples as well. What is the technology behind this? Very, very simple. One of those mechanisms is that we have stem cells in our muscle. And cows have stem cells in their muscle too, a lot of them. And stem cells are able to proliferate, and they're able, because they are muscle-specific stem cells, to create muscle tissue. They do that inside of the cow, but they can also do that outside of the cow. That's basically the trick. So you start with taking a biopsy from a muscle, just a needle biopsy, and you get a small piece of muscle out of that with a couple of hundred of those stem cells. You extract the stem cells, you let them proliferate. We are not using serum, fetal calf serum, to grow these cells. We are not using antibiotics to grow these cells. You can do that without all these components, and that's what we do. Of course, we also make fat tissue, because the first one that we made was kind of dry. You need fat in there. And that creates interesting opportunities also because you can make that fat actually omega-3 rich so that the hamburger becomes healthier for you. That's our gift to the hamburger industry. But the multiplication factor of these cells is really, really important, because that makes that from a very small sample, 0.5 gram of biopsy, we can make 2,000 kilos. So that can reduce, and you can take multiple biopsies from a cow, all under anesthesia, of course, and we can reduce the number of cows tremendously, while still maintaining our wish to eat meat. All right, so the multiplication is important, and we made this. We made in 2013 we made millions or hundred thousands of those muscle fibers, and we made hamburgers out of them. And we presented that first hamburger in London in 2013. It was in a sort of hybrid between a cooking show and a press conference. It was eaten by 2 food critics, and they said, oh yeah, this is a hamburger. It cost us about €250,000 to make that hamburger. So it was not a cheap piece of minced meat, but it was basically to show everybody, you know, the technology is there. And we have to think about how are we going to produce meat in the future. And it did that trick. This event started an industry that has now 40 startups over the world in California, Netherlands, and Europe, and in Israel. So that was cool. Now, one of the things that came out of that sort of very public exposure is the question, are you going to eat this? Right? And there was a lot of headlines in the newspapers that started yuck and frankenfood. So there's a lot of kind of emotion coming up when you do this. And I'm a medical scientist, I'm not a psychologist, so was a little bit frustrating also, I must admit. But also frustrating because nobody really could explain me what that emotion, what that reservation was. And of course, it's unknown, and we are biologically programmed not to eat stuff what we don't know, right? If you go into the forest and you forage mushrooms and you cook soup and you have no idea what you're doing, you have 95% chance that you poison yourself. Right? So it's a very useful response. On the other hand, we have hot dogs. Who of you has ever eaten a hot dog? Quite a few. Do you know what's in it? Do you want to know? No? This is a typical response that I get. We eat stuff very easily without knowing what it is or how it's being made, without wanting to know what it is. That was kind of my dilemma. Why don't they eat my hamburger, right? And so part of this has to do with safety. You see your neighbor eating a hot dog, and he stays alive, right? And then gradually you start, oh, apparently you can eat this. You don't die from this, at least not immediately. So that kind of creates gradually some trust in that particular food. And trust in food is really, really, really important. Now, the other component of this emotion is what I call that we want to hold on to the illusion that we control how our food is being produced. There's also a little bit to do with trust. And of course, when you think about this technology, you might think, oh, you know, this is going to happen somewhere far away in a low-wage country. We have no control how this is going to happen. For regular meat, you have a cow in the pasture, millions of years of evolution, checks and balances. We can give it antibiotics, we can give it growth hormones, whatever, but that's about how much you can mess with it. Otherwise, it's just a cow. Now you convert that into something that's made by people. People make mistakes, they may be fraudulent, and again, it may happen somewhere far away. So let me introduce to you Mel and Susie. Mel and Susie are 2 cows in a petting zoo 2 blocks away from here. And there are a couple of other animals like chicken and fish and pigs. And kids of primary schools go there, they give them names, they feed them, hence the name petting zoo, they pet them. And they're actually stem cell donors. So once in a while you poke them in the butt, and in a barn next to the petting zoo, you create meat for the entire neighborhood. And you can visit the barn on Sundays, if you like a microbrewery, and you can see how your meat is being produced just in front of your eye. So that's a part of the storytelling that you can do to make this a little bit more attractive and steer away from kind of that vision that it's going to happen somewhere far away and that you have no control over it. The third component, which I just thought of quite recently and realized, is that meat is a little bit more than just a regular food. It's a culture. It's power, fire, masculinity, death, supremacy over another species, all those powerful kind of connotations. Maybe some of you remember, 2 years ago there was a commercial in the Netherlands for barbecue sauce. And it was Sylvester Stallone, I kid you not, with a machine gun, killing half a dozen of people. And there was a kind of a wimpy, scared Dutch actor following in his trail. And at the intermission, at lunch, they had lunch at the table at the set, and Sylvester Stallone puts a big plate of steaks in front of this actor. And he literally says, this is 2018, the Netherlands. If you want to fight like a man, you have to eat like a man. That's the cultural connotation that meat has. And of course, then the barbecue sauce came in. So if you make meat in a lab or in it's completely risk-free. It's kind of a wimpy version of meat. It's more like broccoli, somewhere in between. So, of course, that is also where you have to get used to that. That also takes time. All right. Now that, first of all, we made a hamburger. Can you also make more complex? Can you make a ribeye, right? Hamburger is basically a byproduct of steaks. So can you do that? Yes, of course you can. This is, in essence, a medical technology coming out of tissue engineering. If you impose a larger 3D structure on those cells, they form a larger 3D structure. If you co-culture the fat tissue and the muscle tissue together, which is doable, you get a mixed muscle and fat tissue. But if you make a thick piece like that, you also need to kind of mimic sort of blood vessels, right? Because you need to have nutrients and oxygen evenly distributed through those tissues. That's why you and I have blood vessels. But we need to have some sort of channel perfusion system to get there. We are working on that, but it's going to take a little bit longer to get there. All right, so how about that price of €250,000 for a hamburger? Those of you who might do cell culture might think, oh yeah, I know, cell culture is really, really expensive, and it's also very, very inefficient. So how do we get there? Well, currently, with just scaling up, we got that price down from €250,000 to $11 for a hamburger, right? So that's a big leap. Now, to get it down from 11 to 50 cents, of course, is an even bigger leap, at least in my mind. And for that, you have to transform it from the medical industry to a feed and food industry, right? Get all the resources, the sugars and amino acids, from basically soy and peas and potatoes. So we'll get there. Taste is obviously also important, because at some point, people in the supermarket are going for price and taste. That's it. People are very, very simple in that regard. They might think a little bit about the environment, but if it costs like 50% more, forget about the environment. All right. So this is this whole thing. Can we only make meat? No, we can also make fish and chicken and whatever. And of course, people, especially in the Netherlands, that's important because 75% of our meat is actually a byproduct from dairy, right? So there are also people in the world who make milk through similar technologies. So this is going to happen. This is collectively called cellular agriculture. It's kind of a weird term. It's agriculture because of the products, and it's cellular because it basically relies on the principle of life being the cells. Now, of course, this has also going to have some disadvantages. It's not all hooray. Think about the poor cattle farmers. They will be out of business. I usually don't think of farmers as being poor kind of victims. They are ultimate entrepreneurs in my mind, and they will go where the money is, right? My neighbor used to be a pig farmer, couldn't make money anymore with it, and switched to potatoes. So everything that you can extract value from your land, they will do. So I'm not too worried about that, and we need to have food anyway, so they will still have a job. And that transition, of course, will go relatively slow. It's not from one day to the other. So my vision for the future, and hopefully for those 20 years, is actually a very, very romantic and a really, really conservative one. Still being able to enjoy food and socialize with families and friends, enjoying all the nice foods that we have, including that delicious meat that we are so addicted to, without the negative consequences on environment, food security, and animal welfare. Thank you.